Hi, Craig. Thanks for joining the podcast here at KEDC. And you're here with trust based observations. You have lots of tools and resources for admin supporting teachers or instructional coaches supporting teachers and teachers as they're growing. But before we get into all of that, that's what we're talking about today. Just how do you serve students in your role?
Indirectly, to be honest, but I do it by really going out and training principals in a new way of doing observations that's centered on focus on teacher strengths as a way to build trust, as a way to create conditions so teachers feel psychologically safe to try new things because that's the path towards improvement. And when we create those by training our principals and they model their own vulnerabilities, they're getting trained, which is great because we want whatever we want to model. And so we're doing that for teachers, then teachers feel free to be able to explore, try new things, and then that's how it affects students is circuitously, but we think it's the best way to do it.
Great. Well, thank you for your work to improve students' lives and learning environments. And so, digging into the work that you get to do in this role, why is it important to you?
Ooh, I think I just care about making a difference in the lives of young people. I'm not sure intentionally or how it came about, but I discovered there was a bit of a flaw in the system and that the way that we traditionally observe observations, one, research showed it's not improving teaching and learning, but two, it shows that it actually causes teachers to play it safe and actually causes stress, anxiety, and even lower self-efficacy. Got people that want to they've chosen to not make a lot of money to make a difference in the lives of kids. Let's eliminate all the obstacles we can and make them know how much we appreciate what they do by focusing on their strengths. And when people feel appreciated in their work, which is really what this does, it just
Mm.
changes everything. 75% of people leave their job because they don't feel appreciated. Mindsets change. People with fixed mindsets become growth mindsets. So just man, it's a hard job. Let's honor that and support them. And in doing that, we're going to actually improve teaching and learning, not by rating them strictly.
So, Kentucky has a growth framework that we talk. We
Yeah,
get into the growth. We use the Danielson framework, but
yeah,
growth is a word that we use here. So it sounds a lot like what you just described and in the why behind. We're all just trying to do better every day. We want to give our kids the very best that we can, and we need each other to do that. We need
yeah.
feedback. Need some. I love to measure my impact. To see how am I impacting my listeners? How am I impacting my professional learning participants? And anything that I do. So it sounds like with trust based observation resources, you mentioned strength based, you mentioned psychological safety, asset based. Like these are all very important words for a leader. So let's just dive into, do you mind to backpedal with me before we move on into resources into like, what do you mean by psychological safety when you come from the trust-based observation tools?
Yeah. Well, I think in some ways we almost have to go the other way. Like, and look at what are we doing now and are things that we're doing that are, even though we're well intended, inadvertently interfere with psychological safety.
Okay.
And so there's a guy named Matt O'Leary. He's done all this research on observations, and it shows that as soon as we start to put a rating, a pedagogical rating on you, relational trust between the observer and the observee is diminished, and the result of that is teachers play it safe. They don't try new things. They don't take risks, and so. And I know that it can be a little bit tricky when we have frameworks that statewide we're required to rate pedagogy. But we have, I won't say workarounds, we have ways to work in conjunction with that to minimize the impact as much as we possibly can of putting a rating on pedagogy and take very, very purposeful steps to build relational trust so teachers feel safe to take risks. Are you familiar with Brene Brown?
Yes, very.
Yeah. She
Mhm.
talks about the connection between vulnerability, trust, and risk taking.
Mhm.
She says when vulnerability is too high, people won't take risks. She says the way you get them to take risks is by lowering vulnerability.
Mhm.
She she says the way you lower vulnerability is by building trust. It's this great metaphor. If you think about a jar and each consistent positive interaction or action you have is a marble in the jar. You have to fill that jar before trust is there enough, that the vulnerability is low enough so people will take risks. So we do all these very, very purposeful actions during the reflective conversation to build trust. I know that seems counterintuitive to the way we think of observation, but we do things like have the conversation in the teacher's room instead of our office. Like we'll say, with your 7, 17, or 37, getting called to the principal's office feels like getting called to the principal's office. When it's
Mhm.
in their room, they feel safer. We sit beside them instead of across from them. That builds trust. We tell them the goal is to build enough trust so we could come into your room, see you trying something new, have it be a train wreck, and as opposed to maybe a traditional observation where you'd be having anxiety about it, you won't be worried because you know the next day the first thing I'm going to say is, Randy, I love it that you were trying something new. That's how we get better. It's not always going to work that way. And then there's a bunch more things, but then because it's so strength focused, every little thing that we don't rate the pedagogy during the observations, every little thing that we do is a strength that I'm sharing with you. When I said I could put teachers sharing of themselves under relationship, and I said, oh, when you said when I was your age, guys, and I da 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 da, boy, when you can share things like that that you notice that build relationship or whatever else on our form, and teachers just light up. And like the most common thing we hear teachers say when we've done a round of it is, oh my gosh, it's so nice to hear my bucket filled. It's what I do well. I never hear that. And when that changes, the other thing I'll say we do is we don't start by telling, we start by asking. And we ask two questions. What were you doing to help students learn? If you had the chance to do it again, what would you do differently? But even that sends a message that I value you. All those things together, boom, that's psychological safety. It creates psychological safety. And then teachers will embrace risk taking. Even those that were fixed mindset before come around to growth mindset and are like, okay, yeah, let's do it.
Change is hard, but
Ooh,
when it's for the right reason and you can see your craft improve, we want to be able to have some good feedback, and that's what your tools and your all's philosophy at, trust-based observation is, and, I just wanna expand a little bit more on what you mentioned just now about you don't mark or rank pedagogy during the
yeah,
observation. So
yeah,
that is a shift in our
yeah,
observation. So can you elaborate on that? Describe a little bit more. What does
yeah.
that look like in the
Sure,
observation?
sure. And I think I'm gonna elaborate on within the context of what if I still am required to do something like Danielson that requires it, because if we're gonna talk, let's make it a practical discussion. So there was a 7-year Gates Foundation study designed to improve the quality of teaching student learning outcomes and graduation rates through the development of a more robust teacher evaluation process. And it showed there was no significant or sustained improvement. And then after Race to the Top, there was a 9-year meta study of all the teacher evaluation reforms that were required by law to obtain federal funding. And it showed no improvement. So we know that that's not working. And then O'Leary's work actually shows kind of what happens that I talked about before. And so what we do is we have a very, very detailed form of just 9 core areas of pedagogy, not the 75 or 76, which can be overwhelming, and, that some of the other models have. And we just notice what we see without putting a number on it, or the whatever the words you use to describe it. And so that's what we do because that's what the research says. So how do we make that work in an environment where I'm required to do it? And so I don't know all the details of Kentucky state law, but if it's common with most of the states that I work with do, people are normally on comprehensive, the formal evaluation once every 4 to 5 years, unless you're new. And then the other 3 to 4 years, it's people use different terms for it, but it's usually the teacher and the observer together get to decide a focus area. Oftentimes it's called focus. And so, and different places do different things, but some will say, okay, on the focus years, let's choose something like professionalism that's not an actual pedagogical area. So that can be my focus area. So now we can just, we'll make sure you're being professional, of course, because that's what we're doing, but let's focus on these areas through a strengths-based lens. And then once the trust is established and it's your comprehensive year, like, okay, well, look, this is what we need to do. And so let's do it and do it right on this year. And might even on that year, it might be, well, Randy's been your person that's been working with you doing the trust-based style, but now it's your comprehensive year. Let's have Craig do your formal. So then we're separating out the relationship. And some people will keep open the Danielson while they're doing a TBO style. And when it's one that's like, yep, Yep. They'll use it that way, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just finding a way to honor the truth that people perform best when they feel psychologically safe, and knowing what happens when we rate pedagogy to inhibit trust. And so, how do we find a way to blend law and what I know research tells us?
So, how could rating pedagogy inhibit trust? What have you found on that?
Well, so this is research, so I didn't do the research. It shows that it shows that it increases teacher dissatisfaction in the profession. That's from that Big Gates Foundation study. That's not a good thing, right? When you're less happy about going to work, but it shows that it causes trauma for teachers. It shows that it causes anxiety for teachers. It shows that it causes stress for teachers. And I think there's more, but the one that really concerns me most as a human being is that it shows that it lowers a teacher's sense of self-efficacy. I actually have less confidence in myself. John Hattie's work on effect size, which is vitally important, the highest effect size is collective teacher efficacy in action at a 1.62. By the way, John Hattie is a fan of trust-based observations, has endorsed it, and says that TBO is collective teacher efficacy in action. So if we want collective teacher efficacy, because that's what's most effective, and what we're doing is lowering self-efficacy, how can we ever get to collective teacher efficacy? Like it's a giant myth. So we've got to find a way to eliminate things that are, again, people should putting their hearts on the line every day in these really, really difficult jobs. And now the way I'm doing this lowers my self-efficacy. Let's find a way to focus on what's strong so we can help support your growth.
Okay, just so that our listeners really understand what you're talking about when you say, I'm gonna be more strengths based
Yeah,
and it's gonna feel different when I'm in your room as an observer.
yeah.
How does that like is there the pre-conference? Do you have
Great question.
what's the whole the
Process.
yeah, the
Yeah.
process?
There's no pre-conference. And look, here's the research on pre-conference is that as soon as we have a pre-conference, the research says 65 to 97% of people don't put on their normal lesson. They
Mm,
put on a lesson that's designed to tick the boxes.
hmm,
So then I'm not really watching real teaching. So are my ratings even real? And then more importantly, is my conversation that's supposed to be out, you said Kentucky says growth. How can it be really about growth when I'm not even talking about something authentic? So we eliminate the pre-observation conference. They're 20 minutes, they're unannounced, so we're seeing authentic teaching. But because it's strengths based, after teachers have had the first round of a reflective conversation and know how positive it is, they don't mind that it's unannounced. They actually prefer it because there's not all that worry ahead of time. There's not all that extra planning. There's actually real conversation about real practice. And so there's 20 minutes, they're unannounced. There's just 9 core areas of pedagogy that we look at. The form is really detailed, but it
mhm.
allows me to be super specific with what I'm seeing. I mean, you won't fill in everything every time, but we always tell the teachers the absence of something being filled in is not a negative. We just didn't see it, or maybe it wasn't appropriate. I mean, maybe I should have seen it, but so what? We're trying to grow you. Why do I have to harp on that? That's not the best way to grow you. Over time, I'm like, okay, well, that's the area I'll work on. And so we write what we see. And then the next day, we have these reflective conversations. And they start, like I said, with those 2 questions. And in their room and all those things together, it's so rich for teachers. Even first time when we're training a school, you'll see teachers with their arms crossed every once in a while, with that protective stance. And you'll see, like when we go through the form, we ask those questions, and then the first area we go over is learning target. The second and third area, relationship and behavior management. It's so easy to identify strengths there. By that point in time, you'll see this, and the arms go down, and they relax, and then they will sometimes see tears of joy because teachers aren't used to having their strengths here. And when you've changed everything like that, like the second most popular thing that teachers say, most common thing is, and this is even after the first round, it transforms that quickly, is, gosh, I'm already thinking about what to get better at.
Mm.
Like their walls have come down enough that they're already on their own thinking it. So really that's the process. And I will say this is going to sound a little strange to people, perhaps. We do not offer suggestions the first 3 rounds. There's exceptions. If you're a brand new teacher, of course they need help right away. If I saw something egregious, which I've only seen one time in my life, of course I address it right away. But Remember what Brene Brown said about that jar and marbles? It takes 3 or 4 rounds to fill that jar up. And so my lens is always which one of the 9 areas of pedagogy would do the most to help that teacher improve teaching and learning. And we're so trained to look for what to fix now. It can be hard for us at first to not want to jump in and fix them. But the other thing sometimes that ratings do is they start to create a deficit mindset. I start to look for what's wrong in you. And then unintentionally, it starts to make me look at you with a little less positive light. But when I flip it and I start to look at your strengths, all of a sudden I see you in a more positive light and it's easier for me to help you grow. So even when we help you grow, though, we ask permission to offer a suggestion. That's really different. We don't tell you because generally we just tell people, hey, Brandy, I
Yeah.
want you to get better at adding reflective conversations. Like that doesn't really help you. Or here's an article. We walk with you as we do it. We walk beside you. We'll even co-teach. We'll model. We'll do whatever you want, but it's real, genuine support, just like a teacher would to students. And there's more to it, but that's really the core of what it does and how it looks.
As I was reading your book, you had, a story in it about a veteran teacher of AP,
Yeah.
uh, and AP content, and how it was very much, a lecture type every year, but his class was making very good scores on the AP, so he didn't really have a reason or she to change the class. And then after the trust-based observation, some Kagan structures were recommended for cooperative learning, and he saw points, the average go up. And so the reflection in the book was very positive about, I didn't think I had very much room to change, but that feedback of being open and that trust building and that relationship was obvious in this story, that something new was tried and it had a very positive impact. So do you have a lot of stories like that? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I mean, and for him, it transformed his teaching. He went from being a lecturer, and he had 20% of his kids getting 2 and 1. But we were in Korea in their national school, and that wasn't acceptable in that culture. And he made this change in the next year. He went from a lecturer,
Mm.
and we asked him how he wanted help, and he decided on his own. We paid for it to go to a 2-day social studies Kagan, and he came back and he had the kids in table groups, and he still had his lectures, but they were flipped classroom. So that was the homework. And so the
Mm.
whole time in the class, they were working, and he was just the guide working with them. And he went to 100% pass rate the next year, just to add a little more detail to that story.
Yeah, I
Gosh,
didn't know
we just,
that.
there was just recently. So, um, when we do training, it's quite intense because we're really building mastery of the process, and it's usually a week long on site. And but there's usually a part 2 training where we come back and we do that ask permission to offer suggestion piece. It's not mastery based, so it's a shorter training. And we were just recently at a school, and there was this young teacher, and it was part 2 training. He was 5th grade. And we were watching him in English class, and the teacher, the instructional coach and principal, watched him a lot. And he was really, really impressive. Great relationships, ran a tight ship. Kids loved him, you could tell. And he made it really engaging. But they were doing a book study, and they said this was kind of a perpetual area for growth with him. And what they were doing when they were discussing it, they were having a discussion, but not every kid was really engaged in that discussion the way they wanted. So they wanted to up engagement. And so they offered a Kagan structure, and I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's the one where he would give a prompt after they did a reading. Each student would write their own answer to the prompt. They'd pass it to the student to the right, who would read that student's response, add their own prompt, pass it back, and then the kid would add another one. The kids were so engaged. It was stunning. They were so into it. And then we left when it was recess, when we walked him through and provided the support. And when we had our follow up meeting, he said, "Oh, you guys, when they came back from recess, the first thing the kids said is, 'Can we keep doing it?'" So like already, what a win is that? But maybe even more important to me about this story is I have my own podcast where I interview teachers that are really, really strong that I see when I'm on the road. And so I had him on the podcast, and he said, Craig, it's Tuesday, the Tuesday after you left, we had our grade level meeting, and I was telling them all how I did it. And I showed him exactly what I did. I gave him the whole thing to set it up perfectly. And he said, now the whole team's doing it. Well, Isn't that collective teacher efficacy in action? You've helped one teacher grow and you've created conditions of trust. So now the whole faculty is growing, or at least the whole grade level is growing. And that's just one other story that we have of impact.
Collective efficacy, you mentioned the effect size, and I hope that our listeners, we have some leaders who are listening to this and thinking, "Oh, I could really improve in my effective, my collective efficacy with my teachers," and you've just given a really good example of that. What are some habits from you talked about the training, but what are some habits that our leaders will have within that training, take away, that will help shift to that as a priority in their school?
Habits. Well, because it is mastery training, what ends up happening is you become really, really skilled at filling out those 9 areas on the form. It's a little daunting at first, to be honest with you, but because we go over it over and over and over, and then we go over what we observed over and over and over, you get stronger. So you become really pedagogically expertise at our 9 core areas of practice, which no matter what your style of school is, they work. So that's I mean, I think that's a habit of sorts. But I think you become it almost it, I don't tell you it's by design, but it changes your mindset. Where, like I said earlier, the traditional uh, um, observations tend to have us look at teachers with a deficit. All of a sudden, I find a mindset shift to my own. So I see you from a strengths based, and it makes such a difference. I'm not sure it's a habit, but it really does, I guess, suppose, because it sort of habited you into deficit mindset. So it habits you into a strengths based mindset. Um, I mean, I think it makes you more kind and humane.
Mm,
And not that people aren't kind and humane, but sometimes the system can work against what we want to do. And so I think it builds a habit of that. It builds an awareness of the challenges of teaching and the amazing work they do, especially with the increase in misbehavior that we've had since COVID and to see what they're doing. So I think those are some of the habits that you build that carry over. I think it makes you more aware of every interaction you have outside of the classroom because every interaction you have matters for building trust. So I think those are some of the things. I think you get more skilled in becoming a true instructional leader and a true instructional coach, not just a manager. And if we really want to influence growth, if I really want to inspire, then the system really teaches you how to do that. And I'll say this when we've been doing observations before, because I know there are listeners out there that are doing it in the ways that they're required to do. And when I have to give you a 2 on a rating when you think you're a 3 or a 4, and I know you dread having that. I know you dread the paperwork that you have to do for a pre observation conference and then a regular conference and then a follow up conference. And then, so if you go from that to having something that's like an obligation, to when you see teachers react with joy and then you see meaningful impact and improved teaching and learning, your own mindset shifts to like, yes, I want to do this. I was just looking at some emails over the weekend that somebody had sent me from a recent training that their teachers had sent like to the head of school. And they were saying, oh my gosh, I think now everybody in the whole school is going to want to be observed. Take that in.
wow.
Want to be observed? That's not something you ever hear teachers say. So it shifts your culture. You create a culture of trust in your school. And all of that, you create collective teacher efficacy in action. It happened. I was actually, I John had endorsed the book, but I actually had a conversation with him a week ago Sunday for the very first time, which by the way, I was starboying like, oh my
Yes.
gosh, I'm talking to John Hattie. But he was even saying, well, like we've got these issues with collective teacher efficacy. Like, how is TBO dealing with that? And actualizing it. And he was actually like, huh? I mean, he was impressed, which I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
That's great. So, what does it look like? What does this type of training look like for a district or a school?
Yeah, and it depends whether it's a district or school, but it's intense because it's a week long and it's on site. So if you have, I mean, what we find is we can take up to 6 people at a time to build mastery. If it's more than that, I'm not getting you the right amount of practice. And so if it's 6 people, then we could pull Maybe it's 3 elementary schools with a principal and assistant principal, and we kind of rotate between school and school. Or maybe it's a high school that has 6, or they have got instructional coaches, and it's really a week. And then if it is just, I'll talk about district in just a second, but because we want to make it cost manageable for people. And so really we go in and we kind of go over all the core part of it Monday morning, but it's really learning by doing. So we go in and we fill in that form together. There's 6 of us with laptops or whatever, which is a little daunting for teachers until they have the conversation and know it's strengths based. And then part two is we come back and we go over the form. I think I said earlier that learning targets is the first thing. So I might say, Brandy, what'd you get on learning targets? Oh, where did you see that? And then we work our way through every area of the form. So as we're doing that, it's really peer to peer formative assessment and descriptive feedback, and we're helping each other grow each time we do it. And then part three is we lead the reflective conversation. Basically, I or whoever's training leads the first one as a model, but we even provide a script for you. We want you to find your own voice, but to help you at first with using that to guide you along the way. And then when you're not leading, you're actually watching your peers with a success criteria sheet, the same one I use. So again, peer to peer feedback, which influences my own learning. And then we have a reflective conversation on the reflective conversation. And we literally do that 12, 14 times over the course of the week with teachers in your building so they're feeling the impact. And the buzz starts that week when the trainer's there and all these people are there. And by the end of the week, you're like, man, I got this. You want to make sure when we leave, the trajectory is only going to be up. And there's research on mastery learning says you need to do something 6 or 7 times. And over the course of the week, not every single person does it 6 or 7 times, but you'll let it but you'll practice in one way or another 12, and then you've got it down.
As you're describing that, I'm thinking I was a school administrator for most of my career.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a very vulnerable place
Mm,
for a school administrator,
yeah.
but really the lead learner. You're modeling learning and the
You
growing.
you said something so important there because when they're there, like one of the things you can say is like, look, we're the ones on the hot seat, not you. And if Craig or whoever jumps in, it's to correct us, not you. You can actually put your feet up and relax. You're just helping us learn. And for sure, we're going from beginner to expert by Friday. So you're not nailing it on Monday afternoon the first time you're doing it for sure. But what you are doing is you're modeling your own vulnerability. You're modeling your own risk taking. And we want kids to risk take and model, and we want teachers to risk take and model vulnerability. Is there a better place to start than with my doing it? And it's really, really an impactful. I can't say I designed it thinking about that, but it's a huge bonus that that's what it does.
Absolutely. I can see now after you've described that's the culture shift of, oh, they're willing to invest in themselves in front of us, with us, and now it's strengths based. These are all very positive things. Very, very positive.
Shifts your culture in a week. It
Wow.
really does.
Well, we've definitely got some admin and different district folks that will be interested in hearing this information. So I'll make sure that your contact information is in the show notes. And is there anything else that you would like to let our listeners know about what you all offer?
I mean, really, that's the core of what we do is we just support you in learning how to master the process. But it's ongoing. Our support doesn't just end after on Friday afternoon, and so we're just here to support and grow and find a way to help leaders to help their teachers and honor their teachers, all in service of what our ultimate goal is: improving teaching and learning for kids.
Yes. And as we're pushing ourselves to innovate and look at competency based learning, our portrait of a learner and the competencies, and we're shifting. We're asking learners to shift. Well, they're shifting. We are shifting because of communities. We're shifting to help them trans- transfer into the communities with more competency based
Mhm.
learning and be able to apply it right away. Risk taking, growing. That is our world. And so what you're saying here is, starting with the leader and doing that. And so that's beautiful because our whole system is shifting to that direction. Well, thank you so much for the conversation, for letting our listeners know about your resources and tools. We'll make sure those are in the show notes, Craig.
Thanks, Brandy. I'm grateful for the opportunity in the chat.
And we'll make sure your podcast is linked as well. And what's
That
the
would
name
be good too. Oh, mine? It's called
of
20 Minutes of Teaching Brilliance on the Road with Trust-Based Observations.
that? Okay, we'll make sure that's linked in there as well so they can hear some stories from that.
Sure, thanks.
Thanks, Craig.
Bye bye.